Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier, and thank you for taking time out of your busy day to stop by. It's thoroughly appreciated. I'd like to just mention that Mindspeak returns on Saturday, the 25th. That's this Saturday at the Intercontinental Nairobi Mara Ballroom. We serve breakfast from about 9:30. We start at 10. Dr. Titus Naikuni is the CEO of Kenya Airways. Is the guest. He's been at the helm of KQ for 10 years, and I think it's going to be an excellent opportunity to find out what exactly is happening and how it is running an airline way on the frontier. I'll put up a photograph of Titus showing Katrina where Kenya Airways is going to expand within Africa, and another photograph of the Boeing 777, the day the President named it. There is also a link for interviews with Dr. Naikuni and with Alex Bugwa, his CFO, that I did not too long ago. Home thoughts return to Victor Hugo. There is nothing like a dream to create the future. I've told myself I'm going to treat myself to a meal of wolf's mouth dining, and I'll put up a photograph of a dish. And when I went to look at their website, it said this: if you are led like cattle, you will be fed like cattle, which I thought was pretty powerful, actually. The Iranian invite to the Syria talks was withdrawn after boycott threat. The Secretary General is deeply disappointed by Iranian public statements today that are not at all consistent with that stated commitment. He continues to urge Iran to join the global consensus behind the Geneva Communiqué. Given that it has chosen to remain outside that basic understanding, he has decided that the one-day Montreux gathering will proceed without Iran's participation. In an interview on Monday with news agency AFP, Assad declared that he was likely to run for re-election later this year, making clear that his removal was not up for discussion. I see no reason why I shouldn't stand, he said. There is public desire, public opinion in favor of my candidacy. I will not hesitate for a second to run for election. He ruled out accepting opposition figures as ministers in his government, saying that was not realistic, and said the Swiss talks should aim to fight terrorism, his blanket term for his armed opponents. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, talking about the Iranians, said not to ensure that all those who may directly influence the situation are present would, I think, be an unforgivable mistake, and I think he's right. On balance, I think the tectonic plates are shifting, and the West is increasingly persuaded by President Assad's argument about the rebellion being, one of Islamic terror. And really, there are a bunch of ne'er-do-wells involved in that who were inserted into it very early on and took what I thought was a very legitimate protest into territory, which then took it into an armed rebellion, as it were. And I think, frankly, if President Assad stood for election, he'd probably win it fair and square, as did President Bangui, interestingly enough, in my view. An Islamic militant group said in a video posted online that it was behind two suicide bombings that killed at least 34 people last month in the Russian city of Volgograd, and threatened to attack the Sochi Winter Olympics. In a warning to President Vladimir Putin over next month's games, a man says in Russian in the video, "If you hold the Olympics, you will receive a present from us for you and all those tourists who will come over. It will be for all the Muslim blood that is shed every day around the world, be it in Afghanistan, Somalia, Syria, all around the world. This will be our revenge," he says. The video says two men called Suleiman and Abdur Rahman carried out the Volgograd attacks on behalf of a group known as Vilayat Dagestan and linked to an Iraqi faction called Ansar al-Sunnah. And clearly, I like this sentence I found on Global Research: making the Sochi Games a PR disaster is the goal of Putin's enemies, and indeed it is. And in this article, from which I took that sentence, it's referring to the fact that Saudi Arabia and Russia are ranged on opposite sides at the moment, and saying that Saudi Arabia has scored several direct hits against Putin's Russia, but that Putin is unlikely to take that line down. Revenge hits against Saudi-backed Arab capitals and against Riyadh-backed forces active in Syria are either certain or not impossible. To ram home the Putin message that Saudi Arabia is a small country on the edge of the world island that talks a lot too loud, only thanks to oil. And this is talking about, and in this article, and I'll read it because it's making some pretty punchy points, Saudi terror strategy may be comfortable for its Riyadh purveyors, players and pairs safe in Riyadh. When it concerns Mali, Niger, South Sudan, the CAR or Riyadh's other low-income black African asymmetric war theatres. But in the Russian Caucasus, this is a high-risk gambit and historic conflict that Islam always lost. Inside the Russian Federation, long-standing political conflicts are already sufficient to make government difficult. Adding a layer of Saudi-financed and American-tolerated Islamic extremism may create a runaway process of domestic conflict, which for Putin and his oligarchs, this is a point I found interesting, is exactly what they want to intensify and seal their total power. Referring to the report by The Telegraph back in October about Saudi Arabia's under-the-table offer to Russia, this was the one that was offered by Prince Bandar for a chance to control the world's oil market in some kind of strategic alliance between OPEC and Russia, but only if Russia would wash its hands of the Assad regime in Syria. That was the carrot. The stick was somewhat more barbaric, apparently. Bandar threatened to unleash his Chechen terrorists in order to shut down and possibly kill civilians at Sochi, he is alleged to have said. I can give you a guarantee to protect the Winter Olympics next year. The Chechen groups that threaten the security of the Games are controlled by us, he said. And in this article saying, the theatre for terror war and counter-terror, which is now sort of coalescing in Sochi, concerns the whole world. According to this report, the lady called Razmina is now the most wanted lady in Russia. I'll put up a photograph of her, and also a photograph of Vladimir Putin and Prince Bandar, referring to that discussion that the Telegraph picked up on. Dawoodi Bohra Muslims crowd around the vehicle carrying the body of their spiritual leader Sayyidina Muhammad Burhanuddin. And there are quite a few Bohras in Kenya, some of whom are my friends. I can console them on their loss. The Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe appeared in public for the first time in several weeks on Monday to mourn the death of his sister, ending speculation that he may be bedridden, in declining health, or even dead. And that sort of canard keeps coming up, doesn't it? And then you always find him sort of bounding down the stairs of an aeroplane in order to sort of prick that particular idea. Japan's top government spokesman Yoshihide Suga defended the controversial cull in the town of Taichi as lawful, swatting away criticism from the US Ambassador Caroline Kennedy. And it's just an awful photograph of the Independent, just blood-red river, I'll put it down. And the dolphins are marvelous, intelligent creatures. We met some on the way to Wasini Island, and I'll put up a link to the video. We went 750 days ago, and I promised my Hannah to take her again this time. We didn't have time, I'm afraid. And I'll also put up a photograph of the bottlenose dolphins that time that we went to visit, and I captured it on video as well. The euro is at $135.44, dollar index firmer again at 81.21, and that's largely because the yen has softened to 104.67, ending a 3-day advance, in fact. Swiss franc 0.9121, pound 164.26, and that economy is really doing rather well. Aussie 0.8814, India rupee 61.489, South Korean won 1064.30, the Rial 234.36, Egyptian pound 696.29, the Rand 1085.55, The rand has fallen 3% this year, but some folks are thinking it's overdue a short covering bounce. The yen has climbed 2% this year's biggest gainer among 10 developed market currencies tracked by Bloomberg's correlation-weighted indices. New Zealand dollar, interestingly, is up 2.7%, dollar 1.2%, euro down 0.4%, and of course Japan's currency was the biggest decliner in 2013, tumbling 17%. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index, and I'm very circumspect now. It might rally further or it might fall back again, but it's a little bit tricky. Euro dollar 135.44, my stop remains at 133.80, but that's also beginning to soften. Dollar yen 104.67, it fell against all its major peers. The Bank of Japan began a 2-day monetary policy meeting today amid speculation that the governor will expand stimulus this year to counter the drag from a planned sales increase. I'll put up a 1-year chart of gold. That's at 12.52.52, barely changed from yesterday. Crude oil, March contract 94.14. And I'm increasingly of the view that there is a deluge of Iranian oil snaking its way onto the market. WTI actually settled at the highest price since January the 2nd, but subsequently it's been trading low for Martin Luther King Day yesterday. My weekend piece was called Africa Correlations to Fed Reserve Tapering. The Federal Reserve tapered $10 billion out of $85 billion. They've been purchasing $85 billion of government and mortgage securities under a program called QE3 and on a monthly basis. The current run rate of $75 billion monthly equates to $900 billion annually, slightly less than the previous $1.020 trillion. In truth, this was money that was magicked out of thin air by the wizards at the Federal Reserve. Interestingly, Weimar Germany and President Mugabe's Zimbabwe had tried the same magic tricks, failed in a deluge of worthless banknotes, and today both Germany and Zimbabwe, well, up to a point in Zimbabwe's case, are proponents of sound money. I was telling the British High Commissioner, Dr. Christian Turner, I knew you were good because of the chatter that preceded you. Dr. Turner replied, the bow wave. Everyone has to have a bow wave. Well, the taper's bow wave seriously roiled the markets last year. You will recall the Indian rupee crashed to an all-time low and cash started to fly out of emerging markets. Naturally, there were and still are concerns that the shock wave of the actual taper might therefore be a bleeding edge, slicing up peripheral assets in some kind of frenzied orgy of violence. A lot of folks were predicting that Africa might turn out to be at the bleeding edge of this taper. The defining characteristic of the 2-year Africa bull market phenomenon has been the increased allocation by international investors to African equities. The argument goes that these folks only got into Africa because they had 1.020 trillion of QE at their backs, and the moment that the escalator wind was not there, they would be hitting the exit button. Sure, the South African rand, which has actually been a kind of global proxy for risk and still is at the bleeding edge of the taper. And last week was at 5-year lows versus the dollar and just a whisker below 11. And if the taper turns helter-skelter, then the rand might even head to 12. Interestingly, African equity markets have had a real solid start to the year. Egypt, and this was written on Saturday, is plus 5.32%. It's actually corrected in 2014. And if the equity markets had a vote in Egypt, Army General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi would actually get one of those impossible to believe votes of 99.8%. The equity market in Egypt has rallied more than 50% since Morsi exited stage left. The Nairobi Oil Share, second best in 2014, at that point on the weekend had rallied 2.66%, Ghana plus 1.95% in a record, Nigeria plus 102%. I predict equity markets will make it a 3-year bull year phenomenon. In particular, I feel that the international investor component invested in Africa Inc. remains a long way below benchmark, and that the move towards benchmark has a long way to go and is a big macro structural thing. And of course, there is our big Wembley Stadium moment with the Eurobond, which is now imminent. I incline to the view that the Kenya government should slot the Eurobond market the full 2 billion. This Eurobond issue will release the pressure cooker that is the domestic bond and interest rate markets. We should see a good rally in interest rates. Hopefully the banks will go for some volume and not just spread, and the economy can get juiced a little on lower interest rates. And if President Barack Obama and Iran President Hassan Rouhani can keep talking nice to each other, a lower crude oil price might just juice it all up some more. I know the World Bank came out with a strangely linear prediction of 0.1% GDP increments in our GDP from 5.1% in 2014, 5.2% in 2015, 5.3% in 2016, but I forecast, notwithstanding elevated noise and interference from the devolution experiment, a better than 5.1% outcome this year. On that note, I'll put up a photograph of a selfie of Patrick Quarko, Christian Turner, and myself when he actually made that comment about the bow wave. Yesterday, the European Union was apparently going to send us 1,000 soldiers to help stabilize the CAR, deploying its first major army operation in 6 years. However, today it turns out that they're going to send 500 troops. The mayor of Bangui is elected the interim president of the CAR. The EU reportedly agrees to send troops. Thomas Fessy reports from Bangui, in the absence of government, angry mobs now rule the streets. On that note, I'll put up a photograph of the Bienvenue at Bangui, welcome to Bangui sign that you'd find if you were to visit. I'll also put up a photograph of the first Rwandan soldiers who are part of an African Union peacekeeping force in the CAR arriving in Bangui on a US Air Force plane. South Sudan is saying that they've retaken the oil state capital of Malakal. The rebels are denying that story. They took Malakal and other areas around in the Upper Nile region, Kiir told a news conference referring to his forces. A rebel spokesman in Addis Ababa, where talks aimed at securing a ceasefire have been grinding on, dismissed Kiir's statement. It is true that they made an attempt to capture the town around 1 p.m. this afternoon, but they were defeated. Malakal is still in our hands. Witnesses say Malakal, a major transport hub on the White Nile, has been nearly destroyed by weeks of heavy shelling between both sides. On that note, I'll put up a photograph I found from somebody called Rudy Ranks of Bor, the main street in Bor, and that too looks as if it's been torched. The South African oil share is up 1.53% this year and at a record high again. Dollar versus rand, I'll put up a 1-month chart. Expectations that there might be a little bit of a short covering rally back down to that level of 10.55, which was say key. The fundamental picture for South Africa remains bleak, Keenan said. We have socio-political tensions, renewed labour issues, and the current account and fiscal pictures aren't likely to improve for a number of quarters. Combine that with global headwinds, and the rand is going to maintain a weakening bias, and I'd agree with that. Egyptian pound, I put up a 3-month chart, that's just below 7. Seems, I told you earlier in the year they relaxed the rules for folks who wanted to send money out, and I think that's loosened up the pound a little bit. The Nigerian oil share up 0.35% in 2014. Sorry, the Egyptian stock market, best performing in Africa, up 3.76% this year. Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index up 2.78% this year, and that's at a record. Interesting report in BD Live saying that South Africa ignores the vast Mozambique gas field. Saying the Japanese are all over this, and that's why in part Shinzo Abe was visiting Mozambique. The Japanese Prime Minister was in Mozambique this week to sign agreements with the government on energy. We, South Africa, are doing nothing. China trade with Sierra Leone is expected to climb sharply on iron ore demand. China will expand trade with Sierra Leone this year to a record $2 billion as the world's largest user of iron ore seeks more of the material for steel making. Came across this article by a Zimbabwean MP. It is clear now that the ZANU-PF leadership is fully aware of the fact that the economy is contracting quite rapidly. The clearest indication of this statistically is the steady decline in VAT collections in the past 3 months. Do have a look at a 5-minute cut of the Kenya Ready for Takeoff conference that I participated in earlier last year. And if you haven't, do have a look at Christine Lagarde's Mind Speak from January the 6th. A very interesting article in the New York Times. I know it's a subscriber model now, so I've actually been a little bit cheeky and put the entire story up on rich wrap-ups. And in this article saying African leaders are often asked to look to countries like Singapore and Taiwan for examples of the transformative impact that clean, effective government can have in turning around a nation's economy. But they might do better to look closer to home. Talking about Asian tigers, but saying, but jumping and saying, it was the reverse of the conditions found in Asia. In Kenya, the realities of corruption, nepotism, sheer inefficiency of the state telecommunication monopoly that helped inspire a banking and finance revolution that is spreading from sub-Saharan Africa to India, Afghanistan, and beyond. There are few more stunning success stories in the developing world than the explosion in the use of mobile phone money transfers. And then talking about M-Pesa, financial inclusion rate, 18 million active subscribers on the service now. In 2012, processed transactions amounting to 31% of the country's GDP of about 37 billion. And indeed, it's been an extraordinary laboratory experiment. Part of the reason was, of course, was that the president at the time was a shareholder and therefore aligned with the success of what looked like an insurgent. I'll put up a link to an interview I did with Bob immediately after his first half results. Safaricom is up 8.33% this year and just a whisker off a record. I took a photograph of an M-Pesa shop 620 days ago, and that day I wrote on the tweet, or the TwitPic, it's M-Pesa, the jewel in the Safaricom crown. And 504 days ago I was in Switzerland, and the chairman of Credit Suisse said mobile payments are more popular in Kenya than Switzerland. The Nairobi All shares up 3.263% this year. This follows a 44.05% return last year and a 2-year return of 100.87%. The NSE 20, the 1-year performance plus 19.21%, up 1.95% this year, and 2-year performance up 53.73%. The Nairobi All share was firmer yesterday, a firm 0.59%. It's going to firm again today. As I said, up 3.263% in 2014 and just 1.031% below a record closing high from last year. This is a more than 2-year bull rally as evidenced by the 2-year returns. Turnover yesterday was mostly in KCB and Equity Bank, which both turned lower, twice as many winners as losers, which confirms the underlying bullishness of the market. Diamond Trust, Britam and Kenya Re set fresh all-time highs yesterday and probably will set fresh all-time highs again today. I sincerely hope to see you at Mindspeak, which is on Saturday at the Intercontinental, breakfast from 9:30. Dr. Titus Cooney in the house. And in future, if you want to get email updates, please just register on the site. It's free. Get a password and you're all good to go, and we can at least keep you in the loop if we've got any events. Once again, thank you.